Welcome to the second session of the series. In this session, we're learning how to judge comparisons, which is a pair of a team, and judging extensions. Extensions come by closing teams. There are two closing teams. There are six comparisons in a BP debate. First clarification or thing to note down is that each comparison is a separate debate in itself, which means in a BP debate, if OG versus O is one comparison, that comparison needs to be treated as such, as in a single isolated debate, right? This will also come in handy, or this will also be present in the session again when we learn deliberation. But just understand that those six comparisons exist as separate debates. Second thing, extensions are very important because out of these six comparisons, five of those comparisons require you to do extensions well, because out of the six, apart from OG versus O, rest of the five comparisons has at least one closing team, and hence you need to judge those extensions well, right? That is the premise or just the disclaimer in this session. We can start with comparisons now. Comparisons is simple. You are mostly covered when you have learned how to judge a clash in the first session. We're just going to learn or just look at three things that can assist you while you are judging a comparison or deciding which side to give a victory to in a comparison, right? What is the first thing there? The first thing is, how do you give importance to clashes in general, as in like decisively which clash is more important, or just how to give importance to a clash in the sense that even if the impact is not important, I should give it importance in the sense of paying attention to it. So, what does that mean? That covers in the first pointer itself. Let's say there's a clash which took a lot of time in the debate. Let's say in the top half, OG versus O kept talking about a clash which took a lot of time in the speeches. That is a guiding light for you to start with that clash when you're thinking about this comparison, because they found it important. Even if eventually, through your analysis, you see that all of the material under this clash are assertive and this clash is a wash, that is fine. But you can start with this because the teams find it important, and you can take a bigger chunk of the comparison out of the way and just decide the result of this clash, right? So, as a guiding light, as a starting point, you can start with the clash that took the most amount of time. This does not mean it is a replacement of proof. Someone spending more time on a clash or an argument does not mean they proved it better. Please apply the basics that we learned in judging a clash, right? Second thing is how to tell major and minor clashes. Very simple. Again, if you know how to judge a clash, you know how to tell which is a major, which is a minor clash. It all depends on the impacts and how much are they proven. Just apply metrics onto impacts of those clashes and decide what is a major one. If an impact under a clash which both teams argued for has the largest scale, or let's say the most amount of analysis under it, hence that impact is most likely from either side, like whichever metric, let's say vulnerability or extent or anything else, right? If these metrics or the impacts are bigger or more consequential, that is a major clash. So you decide which clash is how major, how minor. At the end of the day, you collect all the clashes, just see which team did the bigger part of winning, as in they proved the more major clashes to be on their side, and give the win. Very key and small clarification here. Winning more number of clashes does not mean you're winning the debate. Someone could win the most important clash and win that comparison, right? So decide basis on that. One small note here. Notice that throughout the special session, we'll be talking about consequential arguments, because principal arguments is a whole separate session. I'm not taking these sessions through the lens of judging principal arguments. That can be a separate session. But for now, especially because the session is for beginners, and because this will cover most of the ground in the circuit, like most of the debates have largely consequential arguments, and hence you'll be covered. So just note that as well. Thirdly, coming to just pointing out something, if you judge each individual clash well, you will not have any difficulty giving victories in comparisons. So just do that part, which is judging a clash, which we saw here, right? Just do that well, you will be covered. So once that is out of the way, second thing that can assist you, how to judge unengaged and uncomparative material. The first thing to point here is unengaged material is not the same as uncomparative material. What is unengaged material? Is just simply the other team did not respond to it with either rebuttals or their own constructive analysis, right? So even in their argumentation, there's no direct clashing analysis against us. So there's no engagement from opposition to side government, or let's say they also did not explicitly respond to us etc. So some material can be exclusively unengaged while being good or solid, right? That is different. Uncomparative material is a material which is not exclusive, which is not comparative in the debate. It is not debate winning because the debate is a comparison, which means if I prove a benefit but do not necessarily prove why this benefit only exists on my side, that material is uncomparative. If I prove a harm onto the other side without proving that harm does not exist on my side, that material is uncomparative. Those two things are different, right? So first, let's clarify that. So what does that mean? If a comparative, like if a good material which is proven to be exclusive and likely, right? If that goes unengaged with, you as a judge should treat it just how it is, which means that does only means the team which is not engaging with it is just at an advantage. Treat that clash as any other clash, just with lesser responsive material against it, so it'll be easier to win that clash. Only if the material is exclusive and stuff like that. So if it's comparative, if it's exclusive, if the likelihood is proven etc, just apply your concepts to see if you should buy the material and judge the debate, right? Still take this argument as a clash, just from a hollow opposition, right? No responses, no engaging material, just buy the stuff that you should be buying here. No mitigation is happening from the other side. That's it. The second thing then is what to do with uncomparative material. Uncomparative material is inexclusive, which means I'm just throwing benefits or harms and not proving them to exclusive or comparative, and that mostly will be a wash. Which means if I say a benefit on my side, um, let's say feminist movements are better off, but I don't exactly prove why these movements are better off through my mechanisms on my side of the motion, this benefit might as well be symmetric, right? If the mechanism behind the impact is just general, not related to the motion at all, that's not my benefit, and hence that is uncomparative. That is a wash. That material does not add anything to the clash of feminist movements mobility, right? So that is the difference between uncomparative and unengaged. Thirdly, then, what if there's a debate where it's not necessarily uh, unengaged with, but most of the material is just uncomparative, and all the clashes were ending at a wash. Either they were assertive, either they were not exclusive with their analysis, anything at all. How do you give the win to either side then? When clashes are not giving victories to either of the teams, you look at the contribution that they've done. Contribution based victories should be your last, what do you say, resort. You should not be like, oh, this side makes more intuitive sense and I'm giving to them. That's wrong. That's your bias. Intuition is personal. You should not be putting personal standards in a debate. You should give a contribution victory to either sides. What does that mean? Let's say there was clash A and B from both sides. Both the sides were assertive. Nothing to do there. Both these clashes are washes. Now, look at either sides. Let's say at side government, even before the clashes started or the mechanism or solutions came in, they actually characterized the problem statement, which opposition agrees with, right? They explained why this problem exists. They did some kind of world building, problem solved, like why the problem exists, some kind of framing, right? And opposition just agrees to that and runs on that premise and makes the rest of the clashes. After this, if all the clashes made by both teams are null or a wash, side government has clearly done more contribution in this debate by setting up the problem statement in the first place. Both the teams are fighting for the same problem statement and saying my solution is better. But the problem was established by government and opposition just agreed to it, which means the contribution from government is higher, right? This is an example of contribution based victory. Another example is, let's say both of them did not do any analysis behind the problem statement. Both of them just asserted it and agreed to it. Then their clash and their impact proving is also just assertive. At the end of the day, if side opposition did more impacting for their unproven impact here. Let's say their impact is not proven, neither is side governments, but their impacting is good. Let's say they're picturing the world, they are showing why exactly if this impact happens on our side, it will benefit people. Their impacts are visceral. They're showing how this will benefit an average person. They're showing why this impact is generally applicable in the first place, even if the likelihood is shit. They're still showing you the relevance of the impact, right? They're still showing you why the impact matters, whereas government did not even do that. That is contribution. You're not giving the clash to them. You're giving them a victory overall in this comparison based on just any analysis at any point, right? You have to resort to this sometimes when they don't, neither of the teams are proving something concretely, and you can't really say this clash goes to either of the teams. At the very end, you will just say because of this contribution they will close margin, right? So very clear. This part of like the material I'm explaining here is for you to be assisted when the debate is either really bad or really close or just problematic. Okay, now that is the out of the way. The third and the last thing to remember while judging a comparison: never depend on comparisons being transitive while judging. So there are a lot of sequences here. There are a lot of teams. There are 6 different comparisons. There are 4 teams. You're supposed to make a sequence out of it. Do not depend on transitivity to prove some team wins or the other. Which means, let's say CG is winning over OG and OG is winning over opening opposition. That should mean that CG is also winning over opening opposition in theory. It does make sense because only when CG's case is better than OG, they will win over OG. And if even OG's push in terms of impacts, which is their independent analysis, is winning over opening opposition, and if CG has done a better independent job as a closing to win over their own opening, they must be winning over opening opposition. That makes sense in theory. But this should never be applied, depended upon, or just even thought of during a debate. Because if you are not able to find clear reasons of where exactly CG is beating O, where exactly the material is directly engaging with the class they're winning over opening opposition with, and why exactly this material stands independently of their own opening, you are probably giving a wrong call somewhere in the comparisons, right? So if you have to depend on transitivity and you're not able to showcase why they're independently winning in this debate, you are probably doing something wrong either before this comparison or in this comparison, right? So never depend on that. Always only talk about 2 benches in a comparison, never bringing in the third. Never say CG is winning over O because CG is winning over OG and OG is winning over opening opposition, right? One comparison between 2 teams is always independent, isolated, and own debate. Third bench should never be thought of, mentioned, or talked about, right? So only ever think about 2 benches in one comparison. A third bench should never change the result of a comparison at hand. Never, right? Each comparison is an isolated debate of its own. This is very, very important as a fundamental of judging BP. You have to remember this. So, very key thing to remember while judging comparisons. That is it for comparisons. If you've understood it, good. If it's still mushy, pause this right now. I'm going to move on to the next one, but please make sure to look at your notes, try to understand it, talk yourself to it, ask questions in your community, ask questions in the comments, but do not just move for the sake of it, right? We are done with comparisons. We saw 3 key things to assist you. I am moving on. You might pause right now. So, coming to how to judge an extension. Very, very, very important. I think statistically, I'm very confident the most amount of mistakes being made by a BP judge has to be in deciding extensions, and that has cascading problems later in the full sequence, right? Even very good judges or very like good judges don't do it well. So please pay attention here and practice this. So what is an extension? Let's first see. So in a very literal sense, any part of the speech from a closing bench, which is not a verbatim repetition of the opening, is an extension. But that is not an extension that you can credit based on logic, right? The debate happens on logic and reason. We are debating based on ethos. I think it's ethos, but whatever, like logic. So for an extension to be credited as a case, it has to has independent analysis to prove the impacts that they're proving. Very, very, very important, especially during vertical extensions, right? A team to have a extension, to have credit for some clash or some impact, has to have independent analysis for it to be this. We judge extensions to isolate the case of the closing bench from the opening bench. The point of even calling it an extension is to know exactly where the opening bench's case stops and closing bench's case starts, and what should I credit closing with. Most of the times people are over crediting closings. I think under crediting is much less of a problem. People try to or tend to be over crediting closings, and this is very important, right? So our job or the purpose of extensions is to first isolate it, know where opening case starts, and then use that isolated ball of case, right? What is theirs, to compare them between all the other benches, right? And give them a win in those comparisons or loss, right? 5 out of the 6 comparisons depend on you correctly judging this. So this is very, very crucial. Now, how do we do it? How do we judge an extension? So, two parts to extension. One, is it an extension? Two, is it then more important than other case lines, right, in the debate? So, first part, let's first learn how to isolate it in the first place. Do they have an extension? Proving the same impact as their opening is an extension if they prove it using independent analysis. So, for a judge, judging a horizontal extension will not be that difficult of a job in terms of knowing if there's an extension or not, because it's a completely different impact. So you will see, oh, this impact was not on their own opening, it is an extension. Now I have to decide, is this good enough against other, contributions? That is simple. But especially in a vertical extension, which is the same impact, the same line of impact, right? They have to have independent analysis for that impact to be credited to them. What does that mean? And what is a tool to do that? So, independent analysis means every piece of logic spoken in these speeches, every piece of mechanism analysis has to be new, not in words or framing, but new in logic, right? So, a tool to use that, tool to use to know that is, if you remove the entire 2 speeches of the opening bench, the impacts should still remain unproven. Sorry, still remain proven in the closing. What does that mean? Any repetition of any logic from the opening 2 speeches that was ever in the speech should be removed. So, let's say if CG comes and says, we agree to the premise that OG has proven, we are going to build upon that premise and give you new independent analysis for the impact to exist. The independent analysis and the mechanisms have to be new. Or if they come up and say, we agree to all mechanisms they are talking about, here are the impacts that they do not prove, and they just extend on the impact. Notice that the analysis they're using, they're agreeing from their own opening. It's not independent. So if you remove that analysis, you have to remove that analysis from the member's speech as well, right? So it will just become a speech without any analysis, because there is no independent analysis, and you will be left with just impacting. That will become a contribution case, not a case that you can credit this clash to, right? So if you remove any repetition of mechanisms from the opening or any agreement, right, like pointing to it and not proving it again, that becomes their extension. If the impacts still stand, credit it. If not, remove them. What are some instances? It is possible that CG comes and says, we agree to the premise, we're using that, but we have new analysis for the same impact. That is still fine. Now the question is, will it be more important their own opening or not? We'll see that later. But for now, as long as they have new mechanisms on top of the premise to prove the impact, it is still good to go. Let's say they're saying, we agree to the premise, we'll prove the premise again to you using new analysis or new mechanisms. That is even better. Their whole chain of argumentation is new and independent. That is great, right? They're not depending on their opening at all. Now, let's say they're saying, we agree to all the analysis, we just think the impacts could be different. And for the new impacts they're bringing in, they're bringing in new mechanism to reach those impacts as well. That is also an extension. As long as there's new logic, there's new analysis, they're good to go. The second question will come later. Is this extension more important or not? That is a different story. But If independent analysis exists, give them credit. If not, if they just agree to the mechanisms and do more impacting, do more just explanation of the mechanisms, that is not an extension. That is repetition. Talking about the same mechanisms again in new phrasing, in a better way, in a more easier to understand way is not extension. That is just talking. Please do not credit that. I'm spending a lot of time in just one thing here because it's very important. If you remove any repetition of OG from CG case, their case should still stand. Second thing, kind of an extension of this as well. So, why is this true? Because you cannot penalize the other teams for the same logic again, right? Let's say OG gave some logic that was harmful to O. You cannot penalize O from CG side also, even though the work was only done by OG, right? So do not penalize an opening team twice for the analysis given by the opening team on this bench, right? Very simple. That is the reason why we want to isolate it so strictly. Done? Very important. Please pause and think. Second thing then, if they do have an extension, let's say, they do have independent analysis, you can point to it, they are there. Is it more important? Now this becomes a game of any other debate, right? Use metrics same as any other comparison or debate. So is this extension more important than their own opening? This closing versus opening debate is like in any other debate, right? Think of it as an AP debate even. In an AP debate, if government's case was even slightly better than opposition in terms of likelihood or impacting, their impacts were slightly bigger in scale and same likely, right? You would give them a marginal win still, right? You won't be like, oh, this is not double the better as opposition, I can't give them a win. Don't do that. Closing does not have the burden of being exponentially better than their opening, right? They have a big burden of being independent, right? You would notice that this part seems very difficult. Like, they have a big burden to be completely independent. That is true. But they do not have a burden of being double as better as OG. As CG, you can be just slightly better and be a 1 point margin better than OG, right? So at this point, because you've isolated the case very well, it'll be very easy to see which scale is bigger, which likelihood is bigger, which impact is more important because of the metrics that are there, right? Apply your own weighing, apply the explicit weighing by these teams and give them a victory. Please do not fall into a trap thinking, oh, CG is slightly better, but they are a closing, they have a bigger burden, hence they lose to their opening. Do not do that. Their bigger burden is to be independent. After that, it's just a debate between CG and OG, like any other debate. Them being on the same bench does not give CG a higher burden of being double the better or exponentially better, right? So even if they're marginally better, as long as the extension is independent, you should give them the victory. So use metrics as any other comparison or debate. Just think of it as an AP debate at that point, right? And do it. So, yeah, things to note now. We took judging extensions very seriously. We took a lot of time in that. There are two solid things here, very, very important. Like, just practice this a lot. Just there are some things to note. Before we move on to things to note, you can still take some time to understand the extensions again. Ask questions in comments or in your community, whichever DevSoc you're from. Now, I'm moving on. You might not. You might pause here. But once that is done, we have learned in extensions what is an extension, how to know if it's an extension. Second, now that we know if there is an extension, give them, judge if it's better or not. Simple. Is it an extension? Is it better? Things to note now. First one, if both closing teams do not have an extension, judge on contribution. As I talked in comparison as well, if both the teams don't have an extension, same way I explained earlier, just look at contribution. Did one of the team explain some framing, put some analysis behind it? Did someone did impacting and did some analysis of why that impact is important? Did they utilize some, let's say they had good rebuttals that were backed by analysis? It did not really win them a clash, but it was still there, right? Like the fringe contributions. Just judge on that. Do not give wins or victories on clashes just for the sake of it. Do not be scared of saying both the teams don't win any clashes. The victory is on contribution. Here's the contribution 1, 2, 3. Simple. Second thing then, finalizing the initial call. So now that we have learned The full degree of judging a debate. After a debate will happen a deliberation, right? We'll come to that in the next session, but between those two things, how do you do that? Very important thing. While the debate is going on, you're ideally expected to at least know 3 victories in 3 separate comparisons out of 6 already, which means when the opening half is done, you should know who's winning. You will confirm it later in deliberation, but you should know from your own initial call who's winning. When the whole debate is over, you should at least know CG versus OG and CO versus OO. So OGO, CG OG, and COO should at least be decided for you by the time the closing opposition whip has completed their speech. After that, you will get 2 minutes before the deliberation starts to finalize the rest 3 comparisons. Ideally, you should at least have these 3. If the debate was much messier, like you can't do anything, but ideally you should. So this means this also goes back to something we talked about in judging a clash. You are supposed to actively listen and actively decide victories while the debate is going on. You should not wait until the end of the debate to finalize all 6 comparisons. You won't get time for that. So that is important. At least know 3 comparisons before the debate is over or by the time it's over. The rest 3 in the 2 minutes you'll get before the deliberation. Do not start deciding everything after the debate is over. Third thing, how should you practice this? Just compete in competition and mocks anywhere. Practice is only way you will learn this. Theory can only get you so far. The fourth one is read the manual. Very, very, very important. That's it. The next session is going to be deliberation, but this covers extensions, comparisons, and a clash. These 3 things together covers how to get the right call. So now you know how to judge the debate. We will learn how to deliberate and OA later. So that's it.